Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that every god humanity has ever worshipped began with a single question. Not a question about religion, but a question about the world itself. Why does the sun always return? Why does lightning split the sky? Why does death arrive without asking? Thousands of years ago, our ancestors had no science, no telescopes, no physics, no books, only their instincts, and a world they couldn't explain. Imagine standing alone 40,000 years ago. The sun has disappeared. Darkness surrounds you. The only light comes from a small fire, struggling against the wind. Then, without warning, lightning tears across the sky. A deafening roar follows. The ground shakes beneath your feet. Animals disappear into the darkness. You don't know what caused it. You don't know if it will happen again. You don't even know if you'll survive until sunrise. So your mind does the only thing it knows how to do. It searches for an answer, because uncertainty has always terrified us. The human brain wasn't built to accept randomness. It was built to find patterns, to connect events, to search for intention. If the grass suddenly moved, something had to be hiding there. If you heard footsteps, someone had to be coming. If a storm destroyed your village, someone must have sent it. That instinct saved lives. It helped our ancestors survive for hundreds of thousands of years. But it also changed the way they understood the universe. Long before people understood how rain formed or why eclipses happened, they imagined that someone was responsible. Someone controlled the rivers. Someone commanded the wind. Someone painted the stars. Someone decided whether the hunt would succeed or whether a child would survive another winter. Nature wasn't random. It felt alive. It felt personal. And perhaps that was the moment everything changed. Because once nature becomes personal, questions become stories. Stories become beliefs, and beliefs become gods. This wasn't stupidity. It wasn't ignorance. It was the natural consequence of a mind designed to survive. Even today, we still search for meaning. We still ask why the terrible things happen. We still struggle to accept coincidence. Maybe we've changed less than we like to believe, because the same question that echoed through the minds of our ancestors still echoes inside ours. Is someone out there, watching, listening, deciding? That single question may have shaped every civilization that has ever existed. And to understand why humans created gods, we first have to understand the mind that created them. So let's go back, long before history, before kingdoms, before writing, to a world where fear, imagination, and survival walked side by side, because that's where our story begins. Before there were temples, before there were priests, before anyone carved the name of a god into stone, there was only nature. Endless forests, frozen mountains, violent oceans. A world that didn't care whether humans survived or disappeared forever. Every sunrise was a mystery. Every storm was a warning. Every season could mean life or death. For thousands of generations, people didn't believe they controlled nature. They believed they belonged to it. They followed the migration of animals. They watched the stars. They listened to the wind. They learned which rivers gave life and which ones took it away. The earth wasn't simply a place to live. It was something to respect, something to fear. Because survival depended on understanding patterns. When birds suddenly disappeared, something was changing. When the sky turned an unfamiliar color, danger often followed. Every small detail mattered, and over time, those patterns became something more. Not science, not religion, memory. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Stories told around fires long before writing existed. Stories about the Great Hunt, about impossible storms, about places nobody should enter. And, slowly, those stories began to change. The river was no longer just a river. It became something that gave. The mountain was no longer just stone. It became something that watched. The sky was no longer empty. It became something that listened. Humans have always seen intention where none may have existed, because imagining a mind behind nature felt safer than believing nobody was in control. A storm with a purpose is less frightening than a storm without one. And that simple way of thinking changed human history forever. Because once nature feels alive, it doesn't take long before someone asks its name. And that is where the first gods begin to appear. For thousands of years, people didn't worship gods, not in the way we imagine today. There were no great temples, no sacred books, no names carved into stone. Instead, there were spirits, invisible forces, believed to exist within every part of nature. The river wasn't just water, it had a spirit. The forest wasn't just trees, it was alive. The wind could hear you, the mountain could remember you. To our ancestors, the world wasn't made of objects, it was made of living beings. Every hunt began with respect. Every death carried meaning. Every strange dream might have been a message. Over time, certain people claimed they could hear those messages. They became the first shamans. They weren't kings, they weren't rulers. They were storytellers, healers, guides. They spoke to spirits, interpreted dreams, and gave meaning to the unknown. Around the fire, their stories spread. Each generation added something new, a stronger spirit, a wiser ancestor, a greater protector. Little by little, those invisible spirits became something more. They gained personalities, they gained desires, they became beings that could reward or punish. Nature was no longer simply alive. It had intention, it had emotion, it had will. And once a spirit has a personality, it is only one step away from becoming a god. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years, thousands of stories, thousands of winters spent around the fire, until one day humanity stopped asking whether something was there and started asking what it wanted. That question changed history forever. For thousands of years, spirits had no names. They lived in rivers, they whispered through forests, they hid inside storms. But as humans built villages, something changed. People no longer wandered endlessly across the land. They stayed, they planted crops, they raised cities, and for the first time, civilization depended on things humans could not control. Rain, floods, harvests, the changing seasons. A single drought could destroy an entire kingdom. A single flood could feed it for years. Nature had become too important to leave unnamed, so humanity gave it faces. The river became gods, the sky became a king, the sun became a creator, the moon became a guardian. Across Mesopotamia, the people of Sumer worshipped gods who ruled every part of life. In Egypt, the sun crossed the heavens each day because a god carried it. In Greece, lightning belonged to Zeus. The sea obeyed Poseidon. The underworld waited for every soul. Different civilizations, different languages, different continents. Yet somehow they all imagined remarkably similar beings. Powerful, human, emotional, because perhaps the gods humanity created were never really about the universe. Perhaps they were always about us. As civilizations grew, their gods grew with them. Small villages had local spirits, but empires needed something greater. When thousands of people began living under one ruler, the idea of hundreds of competing gods became harder to sustain. Power was becoming centralized, and slowly, so were the heavens. Across history, different civilizations began asking a different question. What if, behind every river, every mountain, every storm, there wasn't a different God? What if there was only one creator, one lawgiver, one source, behind everything? It was a revolutionary idea. Not because it erased old gods overnight, but because it changed how humans understood the universe. The world was no longer ruled by countless unpredictable beings. Instead, everything became part of a single design. One mind, one purpose, one order. For the first time, morality itself became connected to the divine. God was no longer only responsible for nature. God became the source of justice, meaning, purpose, human life itself. Yet, despite these enormous changes, one thing never disappeared: the human need to believe that the universe makes sense. Whether people prayed to many gods or to one, they were still searching for the same answer. Why are we here, and is anyone listening? For thousands of years, humans searched for gods outside themselves, in the sky, in the oceans, in the stars. But what if the real answer has been inside us all along? Modern psychology suggests that the human brain is a pattern-making machine. It constantly searches for order inside chaos. A shadow becomes a person, a coincidence becomes destiny, a random event becomes a sign. Because throughout evolution, assuming that something was watching was often safer than assuming nothing was there. If our ancestors heard movement inside the bushes, it was better to imagine a predator, even if there wasn't one. Those who ignored danger rarely survived. Those who imagined intention lived long enough to pass on their genes. That instinct still lives inside us. It is why we see faces inside clouds, why we search for meaning after tragedy, why we ask why instead of simply accepting chance. Perhaps belief wasn't a mistake. Perhaps it was an evolutionary advantage, a survival tool, one that helped strangers trust each other, build civilizations, create laws, sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Whether gods are real or not is a question this video cannot answer, but one thing is difficult to ignore. The human mind has always searched for something beyond itself, and perhaps that search is what truly makes us human. Today, we understand the stars better than any civilization before us. We know why lightning strikes, how planets are born, how life evolves. The mysteries that once became gods can now be explained by science. And yet, the oldest questions have never disappeared. Why are we here? Why does anything exist at all? Why do we search for meaning in a universe that owes us none? Perhaps creating gods was never about explaining nature. Perhaps it was about explaining ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our loneliness, our endless desire to believe in that our lives matter. Whether gods exist or not, one thing remains true. For thousands of years, every civilization looked toward the sky and searched for something greater than themselves. And maybe that search is the most human thing we have ever done. Because civilizations rise and disappear, empires fall, languages are forgotten, even the names of gods fade into history. But the question that created them still lives inside us. Every time we look at the stars, every time we lose someone we love, every time we wonder if there is more. than this. The gods may change, the stories may change, but the question never does, and perhaps it never will.